On June 24, 1947, at St. Luke's Hospital in Milwaukee, Gina gave birth to a son. Vince and Gina MacRae named him John Vincent MacRae in honor of his great-grandfather and late uncle. He was affectionately called Johnny by his parents. Johnny had dark brown, almost black hair and the MacRae blue eyes. When Johnny was 3 weeks old, Vince received a phone call from his grandmother. Molly told Vince that she and her husband were planning a trip to Milwaukee to visit their new great-grandson. But this morning, John MacRae suffered a debilitating stroke. He became bedridden and was unable to travel. The next day, Vince, Gina, and little Johnny MacRae boarded a train for South Dakota. John MacRae was at St. Joseph's Hospital in Deadwood. 2 days later, Vince, Gina, and Johnny MacRae entered John MacRae's hospital room. John MacRae was unable to speak, but he recognized his great-grandson. Vince said, "Hello, grandfather. This is your great-grandson, John. We named him after you." John MacRae was unable to reply, but his eyes opened wider and he blinked several times. Vince handed Johnny to his great-grandmother. Molly gently hugged Johnny, then kissed him. Little Johnny MacRae was sleeping soundly. That evening, surrounded by his family, John MacRae peacefully entered eternity. Molly said he had a good life. I'm so happy he was able to see his great-grandson. She kissed her husband's forehead and said, "Goodbye, Johnny." After the funeral, the MacRae family gathered at the MacRae home. Vince held his grandmother's hand and said, "Grandma, why don't you come back to Milwaukee with us? We have plenty of room and you could help take care of little Johnny." Gina enthusiastically said, "Please say yes." Molly was taken by surprise and was speechless. She finally said, "Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden to anybody." Gina hugged Molly and said, "You wouldn't be a burden. You would be a big help to us." Little Johnny woke up from his nap and started to cry. 1 week later, Vince, Molly, Gina, and Johnny MacRae were on a train bound for Milwaukee. Molly decided to keep her home in Deadwood as a summer residence for the MacRae family. Vince arranged for a caretaker to take care of the property. Molly's dress shop and emporium were sold. Johnny and Molly became inseparable. He was a very curious child. Johnny's favorite toys were his Lionel electric train and his Gilbert erector set. In the 1950s, he loved to watch Hopalong Cassidy on the MacRae's 17-inch black and white television screen. Johnny would strap on a pair of cap pistols and wear a cowboy hat whenever he watched his hero, Hoppy, ride the range. When Johnny entered the first grade, he was already able to read and write and was given an IQ test. As a result of that test, it was suggested that Johnny skip the first grade. Gina would not allow it, and Johnny's first years in grade school were miserable for him. No matter what he did, the nuns would always tell him he could do better. In later years, Johnny would joke and say, "I just got lucky on that IQ test. I do remember guessing on a lot of the questions. I also got in big trouble for naming Sister Bartholomew Black Bart." High school was enjoyable for Johnny. He attended a technical high school and studied mechanical drafting. He earned a letter in track, and his only other activity was the ski club. Johnny fell in love with skiing. During the summers, he worked at his father's factory in one of the plastic departments. With the money he saved in 1964, Johnny bought a 1959 Chevrolet convertible. Vince MacRae could easily afford to buy his son a new automobile, but decided to teach Johnny the value of money. Vince did tell Gina that he would pay for his son's college education as long as he maintained a C average. Vince suggested that Johnny attend the Milwaukee School of Engineering. That same year, at the age of 101, Molly MacRae joined John MacRae. She was buried next to her husband in South Dakota. Johnny took Molly's passing hard. After her funeral, Johnny said, "I just can't believe she's gone. Last month when I took her for a ride, she told me to put the top down." After graduating from high school, Johnny went to work as a draftsman for a local manufacturer of construction equipment. His parents were disappointed that he not go on to college or show any interest in the family business. When he worked during the summers at his father's factory, he remembered being called Daddy's little boy. He told his parents he didn't see the need for college and he wanted to see if he could make it on his own. Johnny grew to be a handsome young man with dark hair and blue eyes. He enjoyed the company of women and they enjoyed his easygoing nature. During Wisconsin's winter months, Johnny skied at a local resort. It was a happy time for young Johnny MacRae. In July of 1967, the happy times ended. Johnny received his draft notice. Vince and Gina MacRae were devastated when they heard that Johnny volunteered for the Marines. Vince MacRae told his wife that the Marines are always in the thick of battle. He said Johnny should have listened to us and gone on to college. Vince and Gina MacRae were present at the ceremony when Johnny graduated from 9 weeks of Marine Corps basic training. It was a hot and humid day in South Carolina, but Vince MacRae insisted on wearing his wool Class A dress uniform from World War II. On his sleeves were Staff Sergeant's emblems, 3 stripes and 1 rocker. Among the ribbons on his chest were a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. He was surprised to be occasionally saluted by an officer. In spite of walking with a cane, Vince would smartly return the salutes. It was another tearful departure for the MacRae family when Johnny departed for advanced infantry training at Camp Pendleton, California. After 7 weeks of intense training, Private John MacRae was on a flight bound for Vietnam. Johnny was assigned to an infantry battalion. He was proud to be a Marine and earnest in his duties. Private MacRae quickly rose through the ranks, advancing to corporal. During the Tet Offensive, Corporal John MacRae's battalion was given the assignment to protect the Phu Bay Combat Base, Highway 1, and all western approaches to the city of Hue. On the night of January 31st, the Marines faced rocket and mortar fire at the Phu Bay Combat Base. Enemy infantry units hit John MacRae's battalion hard. During a night attack, Johnny was hit with enemy machine gun fire. As he awoke in a field hospital, the surgeon checking his dressings cheerfully said, "How are you feeling, Corporal?" In a raspy voice, Johnny said, "Okay, but I can't feel my leg." The surgeon took on a serious look. He put his hand on Johnny's shoulder and said, "We had to amputate your left leg below the knee." Johnny remembered a saying that his father frequently used. He forced a faint smile and said, "Well, if that's the worst thing that happens to me today, then it's a good day." The surgeon was taken by surprise by the corporal's reply. He did not answer Johnny's remark, but he thought to himself, "I hope you feel that way when the morphine wears off." The surgeon finally said, "You will be going back to Japan for some rehabilitation and then back to the States." As the effects of the morphine wore off, Johnny realized the severity of his wound. He became saddened and depressed and worried about his future. Johnny wondered how he would be able to ski on one leg. Johnny was sent to a hospital in Japan. After he was able to walk with the aid of crutches, Johnny would walk the halls of the hospital to build his strength up. During these walks, he observed many patients who were in far worse condition than he was. Some laid motionless in bed. Finally, Johnny said to himself, Well, maybe if this is the worst thing that happens to me in a day, then it really is a good day. In his later years, Johnny would repeat the saying many times. After his rehabilitation period in Japan, Johnny was flown back to the States. His plane landed at San Diego International Airport. As Johnny and a fellow Marine named Jim walked into the terminal, they were greeted by Vietnam War protesters. They shouted anti-war slogans and spit on Corporal MacRae. Johnny teared up, but when Jim was spit on, he used his remaining arm to fling his Purple Heart at the protesters. Johnny was deeply troubled by the protesters' actions. He looked at Jim and said, "They have a right to voice their opinions, but why do those bastards have to spit on us? We didn't start the damn war." Jim said, "I don't know, Johnny, I just don't know." Johnny and Jim boarded a bus bound for Camp Pendleton. After his discharge from the Marine Corps, Johnny boarded a plane for Chicago and then on to Milwaukee. His parents greeted him when he arrived at Milwaukee's Mitchell International Airport. Gina held back her tears as she watched a one-legged Marine slowly walk towards her with the aid of crutches. When they arrived back at the MacRae home, Johnny quickly changed into civilian clothes. The MacRae family had dinner that evening at the Mason Street pub. Johnny was in a somber mood, but smiled when he said, "This is the first good steak I've had in a long time." He told his parents of the greeting the protesters gave him at the San Diego airport. He did not talk about his experiences in Vietnam. Johnny had 3 beers with his dinner. Vince MacRae said, "Son, I know it's probably too early to discuss this, but have you given any thought to what you're going to do now? My offer still stands about paying for your college education. If you don't want to go to college, you can always have a decent position in our plastics division. I can always use another good salesman." Johnny sighed and said, "I don't know, Father. I haven't given it much thought." Gina looked down and sighed as Johnny ordered his 4th beer. While he waited for his prosthetic leg to be finished, Johnny spent his days at Bradford Beach, sitting in the sun, pondering his future. He spent his evenings watching television and drinking beer. Vince and Gina MacRae became greatly concerned for their son's welfare, but did not pursue the issue of his drinking. Johnny was interested in the ongoing war in Vietnam and started watching the nightly news. As a result, he started to take an interest in politics. He remembered asking his father what was the difference between Republicans and Democrats. Vince MacRae told his son that the Democrats were for the working man and the Republicans were for the businessman. When he asked his father if he was a Democrat or Republican, Vince MacRae told Johnny that he voted for the man. Vince went on to say that he felt most politicians cared only about remaining in office and not listening to their constituents. Johnny went to his local library and checked out books on the history of the Democratic and Republican Party. One evening, Johnny attended a Milwaukee Bucks game with his friend Eddie. A well-known U.S. Senator was standing at the entrance to the Milwaukee Arena, greeting people and shaking hands. He shook Eddie's hand and said, "How are you, young man? I'm your U.S. Senator from Wisconsin." Eddie was in a pistol league sponsored by his employer and a firearm enthusiast. Eddie held on to the senator's hand and politely said, "How do you feel about gun control, Senator?" The senator smiled and said, "Well, how do you feel about it?" Johnny was dismayed by the senator's reply. He looked the senator in the eye and said, "He asked you how you feel about it, Senator." The senator gave a rambling 1-minute reply that made absolutely no sense. Eddie shook his head and released his grip. Eddie and Johnny said nothing and walked away from the senator. As they entered the arena, Eddie said, "Typical politician. That was a bullshit answer." Johnny nodded and said, "He just as well might have spoken Russian." The next day, Johnny began to study the history and voting records of state and local politicians. He went on to study top government officials. 2 weeks later, the family MacRae had dinner at Carl's restaurant. Johnny had 1 glass of wine with his dinner. While waiting for the dessert, Vince said, "Johnny, have you given any more thought about your future? You've been doing a lot of reading lately." Gina frowned and said, "Vince, let's talk about this another time." Johnny said, "That's okay, Mother." "Yes, Father, I have. Does your offer still stand to pay for my tuition? If not, I can use a GI Bill." Vince was delighted with Johnny's reply and said, "Great. Let's stop by MSOE tomorrow and see what courses are available." Johnny bit his lip and said, "I plan on going to the University of Colorado in Boulder." "Well, what's wrong with the Milwaukee School of Engineering? They have one of the best engineering schools in the country," said Vince. Johnny ordered a beer and said, "I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm going to major in political science and history. Boulder has an excellent political science program." Vince's voice grew louder and he said, "Oh, that's just great. What are you going to do, run for president?" Molly tugged on Vince's sleeve and said, "Vince, people are looking at you." Vince calmed down and said, "Son, you're on your own on this. I won't waste my money on a useless education. You better think this one over." Vince MacRae told his wife that his refusal to pay for Johnny's schooling was not a question of money, but a matter of principle. Gina said to herself, "We'll see about that, my dear." The following week, Johnny was fitted with a below-the-knee prosthesis. He adapted quickly to the device and walked with an almost undetectable limp. He told Eddie that at first it felt like trying to taste ice cream without a tongue. The following July, Johnny hitched up a U-Haul trailer to his 1969 red Mustang GT and headed for Boulder, Colorado. At the insistence of Gina, Vince reluctantly agreed to pay for his son's education. Upon arriving in Boulder, Johnny rented a studio apartment near the University of Colorado Boulder campus. He enrolled in a political science undergraduate program. Johnny found the study of political science to be fascinating. It was divided into 3 sub-disciplines consisting of comparative politics, international politics, and political theory. Although Johnny found all 3 of his courses to be interesting, comparative politics was his favorite subject. When Johnny told his parents that he had earned a 3.5 grade point average for his first semester at the University of Colorado, Vince said, "Well, we'll see how long that lasts." Gina said nothing but sighed and shook her head. Johnny declined to join a fraternity but joined the Vets Club. Many of its members were Vietnam veterans. Johnny became friends with a fellow Vietnam vet. Ralph was from California. He was tall and slender with shoulder-length blonde hair. Ralph had also lost a leg in Vietnam. His major was biological and medical science. One evening, as Johnny and Ralph were drinking beer at a local college pub, Johnny said, "I'd sure like to meet some nice foxy chick to go out with. All of the ones I bumped into so far are stuck up as hell." Ralph took a big swig of beer. He grinned and said, "Join the ski club. I met a couple of real beauties there." After several beers, Johnny's language became salty. He frowned at Ralph and said, "You gotta be shitting me. You can't ski on one leg." Ralph looked at Johnny and in a serious tone said, "The hell you can't. I started skiing when I was 3 years old at Mammoth Mountain. I was on my high school ski team and damn good, too. In giant slalom, I placed first almost every time. I even thought about trying out for the Olympics. Skiing is a big part of me. There are ways to ski on one leg." Johnny sheepishly said, "Wow, Ralph, I'm sorry for that dumbass remark. I've heard of Mammoth Mountain. You know, I did belong to my high school ski club. I used to ski a lot in Wisconsin, but I've never skied out west. I do miss skiing." Ralph looked at Johnny and said, "Tell you what, my friend, there's a ski area named Eldora about a half hour from here. I'm going out there on Sunday. Why don't you come out there with me?" "Oh, I don't know, Ralph. I just couldn't ski on one leg," said Johnny. "Now don't be such a big pussy. At least give it a shot. I'll drive. Those wide ovals on your Mustang won't do the job out here," said Ralph. Ralph had Johnny rent one ski boot from a local ski shop. Ralph told Johnny that he would furnish the rest of the equipment. The following Sunday, Ralph drove Johnny out to Eldora Mountain in his Jeep Wrangler. Ralph taught Johnny the three-track method. With the three-track method, Johnny skied on one leg and had an outrigger on each arm instead of ski poles. Ralph told Johnny that he started out with the three-track method and eventually progressed to skiing on two skis with the aid of a special adapter for his prosthesis. Ralph started Johnny on Eldora's rope tow bunny hill to learn the basics of using the outriggers. Johnny did well on the soft pack powder, and they moved to a green beginner run. Ralph and Johnny skied into the afternoon. Johnny took a break and watched Ralph ski one of Eldora's black diamond runs. Ralph was pleased with Johnny's progress and said, "It won't be long you'll be skiing on two skis and skiing the blacks." The following week, Johnny joined the University of Colorado Boulder Ski Club. When Johnny told his mother that he was skiing again, she said, "Just be careful." His father shook his head and said, "That kid's nuts." Johnny fell in love with skiing out west. Although he and Ralph would occasionally miss classes on powder days, Johnny still managed to earn a 3.7 grade point average during his first year at the University of Colorado Boulder. He enjoyed research and fact-finding. During spring break in Johnny's senior year, the ski club held a 4-day trip to Vail. With the help of Ralph, Johnny learned how to ski moguls, or the bumps, as Ralph called them. Johnny was now skiing on two skis with the aid of an adapter for his prosthesis. He developed a technique for skiing in the moguls where he skied slower but in perfect control. People were amazed how well Johnny could ski on one leg. On the last morning of the trip, Johnny was skiing on a run called Highline. It was a double black diamond run, famous for having moguls the size of Volkswagens. When he was halfway down Highline, he noticed the skier ahead of him was falling every other turn. Johnny also noticed that she was a very pretty 20-year-old with blonde hair and emerald green eyes. She was wearing a well-fitted red one-piece freedom suit. Johnny stopped alongside of the fallen skier and said, "You're trying too hard. You got to slow down a bit." The fallen skier smiled at Johnny but said nothing. Johnny helped her up and said, "Here, watch me. Don't forget to plant the pole before each turn." Johnny made a dozen turns, then stopped and looked uphill. He motioned for the fallen skier to follow. The fallen skier slowly skied towards Johnny. She stopped and said, "Wow, that felt a lot better. I'm just not used to skiing big moguls like these." Johnny said, "May I make a suggestion? There's a run to the left called Whiskey Jack. It's got much smaller moguls and part of it is groomed." The fallen skier looked closely at Johnny and said, "Whiskey Jack, I'll have to try it, but I need to take a break. That run wore me out. Thanks for the tip, sir." Johnny smiled and said, "My name's John. My dad's name was Sir. I need a break too. Can I buy you a hot chocolate?" "Oh, that sounds good. Oh, by the way, my name's Rachel." Johnny and Rachel took the number 10 chairlift back up to the summit. On the chairlift ride up, Rachel told Johnny that she was a student at Naropa College in Boulder, and her major was environmental science. Rachel smiled when Johnny told her that his major was political science at the University of Colorado in Boulder. She did not tell Johnny that her father was a Colorado senator. They skied to the Two Elk Lodge for hot chocolate. After Johnny took his skis off, Rachel noticed that he was walking with a slight limp and said, "Are you okay? You're limping a bit." Johnny reluctantly said, I lost a leg in Vietnam, but it's not a big deal. I get around okay. Rachel was speechless. She finally said, My goodness, you ski better than some of the ski instructors I've had. As they drank hot chocolate, Johnny and Rachel chatted about college life. Afterwards, Rachel and Johnny skied together on Whiskey Jack for several hours. Rachel glanced at the clock on the lift operator's shack and said, Oh, I have to run. My girlfriends want to get on the road by 3 o'clock. It was nice meeting you, John. Thanks for the lessons. She shook Johnny's hand. Johnny held on to Rachel's hand and said, Would you have dinner with me sometime? John, I really enjoyed meeting you today, but I'm seeing someone. We'll be getting engaged, said Rachel, as she slowly moved her hand from Johnny's grip. There was a slight bit of hesitation in Rachel's voice. Johnny tried to hide his disappointment and said, Well, you take care now, Rachel. Over a beer, he told Ralph that he met a real cutie at Vail, but she was taken. In spite of enjoying a busy social life with Ralph, Johnny managed to graduate from the University of Colorado in Boulder with a 3.7 grade point average. His major was political science with a minor in history. Ralph went back to California but agreed to meet Johnny each year in Colorado to ski the bumps. Vince and Gina MacRae attended Johnny's graduation ceremony. Vince was hopeful that Johnny would join him in the family business. After the graduation ceremony, Johnny and his parents had dinner at the Matterhorn Supper Club. Johnny said, You folks got to try the trout. It's one of their specialties. After dinner, Vince said, I'm not a seafood person, but this trout is excellent. Good choice, Johnny. Speaking of choices, have you given any thought to what you're going to do now? Son, I need to say something to you straight out. I'm really sorry for being so negative about your choice of education. You are a MacRae and you did your own thing in your own time. Your mother and I are very proud of you. A 3.7 grade average is nothing to sneeze at. Just for the record, there will always be a place for you in the family business, but I'll respect any career choice you decide on. We love you, son. Vince shook Johnny's hand. Johnny firmly shook his father's hand and said, I've been offered a position as an executive assistant on a Colorado senator's staff. Normally they require 2 to 4 years of experience, but I think my grade point helped me get the job. Truth be told, I've grown to love Colorado, especially the skiing out here. The mountains are just beautiful, especially in the wintertime. I'm going to need to trade that Mustang in on something with 4-wheel drive. Gina said, Johnny, we want to wish you the best of everything in your new career. Vince smiled and said, a long time ago I made a smart-ass remark about you running for president. Well, who knows what you might be someday. For a graduation present, Vince and Gina brought Johnny a new 4-wheel drive Jeep Wagoner, with the provision that Vince would get Johnny's red 1969 Mustang GT. 2 weeks later, Johnny started his career as an executive assistant on U.S. Senator Myrtle Johnson's staff. He was kept very busy and worked long hours. His duties consisted of planning special events and projects along with doing research and helping coordinate the senator's daily activities. One evening, Johnny was summoned to Senator Johnson's residence in Evergreen to attend a private dinner. The dinner was given for a newly formed committee on casinos. Because of his background, Johnny was asked to give a dissertation on the history of the Arapaho Indians in Colorado. After a dinner of Rocky Mountain trout and choice filet mignons, after dinner drinks were served, the table was cleared and Senator Johnson began to speak. He introduced Johnny as a member of his staff. Johnny began his dissertation and used a slide projector to display photos and graphs. Johnny was well prepared and the small group listened with interest. As he neared the end of his presentation, he noticed a pretty face with blonde hair and emerald green eyes appear in a doorway. It was Rachel. She smiled at Johnny, then disappeared. Johnny was momentarily distracted, but quickly regained his composure and continued. When Johnny finished, he was given a hearty round of applause. He took his place at the table and listened intently to the rest of the discussions. As Johnny was packing up the slide protector and screen, Rachel appeared, wearing blue jeans and a red turtleneck sweater. She said, "Hello, Johnny. Do you remember me?" Johnny was startled and surprised. He said, "Yes, I do, Rachel. What are you doing here?" "I live here. Senator Johnson is my father," said Rachel as she poured herself a glass of leftover Cabernet. Johnny said, "Do you and your husband live here?" Rachel took a small sip of wine and said, "I never did get engaged. That guy was a real piece of work. He was seeing 2 other women plus myself. One was a congressman's daughter, and the other was the daughter of a guy who owns a lot of land in the Denver area. The jerk was a gold digger and probably looking for the best deal. I should have given you my phone number. Does your offer for dinner still stand?" With a slight frown, Johnny said, "Well, I'd like to, but I don't think it would be appropriate with me working for your father. What would everyone think?" Rachel took a bigger sip of wine. She grinned and said, "The hell with what everyone thinks. I've talked to my father about you several times. I noticed your resume on his desk. I told him all about us meeting together at Vail. My father was a Marine during World War II. He earned a Bronze Star and lost a leg at Iwo Jima." "Well, I hope he didn't hire me out of sympathy," said Johnny. "Believe me when I say there was no sympathy involved. He was impressed with your credentials. He learned of your leg after he made the decision to hire you." "I did tell him that you were a polite individual," said Rachel. Johnny smiled and said, "Well, in that case, how would you like to go skiing with me on Sunday? We could have dinner afterwards. I've been skiing a lot at A Basin. It's not as glitzy as Vail, but the skiing is fantastic." Rachel raised her glass in a toast and said, "I'd love to."